Having worked on barbelled estuaries for so many years, it's a pleasure to have this international workshop, and thanks to the organizers for pulling it together on intermittent estuaries. And thanks also to the many collaborators that I've worked with over the years and on the material I'm going to present. I started off in South Africa working in the Perched back in the 1980s, where we recognized the stratification, the long residence time, and the low oxygen in the bottom layer. And now work in California, where there's a strong north-south gradient in wet versus dry, as well as many urbanized systems, severely perturbed from what they were naturally. And also the importance of the salmonid, the anadromous fish that move from river to sea, which makes these systems really critical. A good place to start is with the sort of management schematic, a report that Kevin O'Connor and Ross Clark and I did to advise the government agency who permits the breaching of the mouth, trying to understand when mouth state changes, what changes from that. Water level, of course, and stratification, and from that, the inundation of marshes and human structures, as well as the water quality. Mostly today I'm going to talk about the hydrology, or if you like, the eco-hydrology, what connects the mouth state with the ecology of the system. A lot of the work I've been doing in California is the Russian River. It's about an hour north of San Francisco. And you can see here the big waves on the California coast piling up the sand at the mouth, the canyon-like nature of the river valley. And then also recognize that in wintertime, you might have flows of 1,000 cubic meters per second, and in summer as low as like 2. I've worked in the system with Dane Behrens and Michael Kuafkan and Kate Hewitt and others who've done a bunch of different studies. Unfortunately, not all of them are published. Got to work on that one. The first thing that happens is, I think, obvious to most people in the audience, is that when the mouth closes, the water level rises. So here's the red line of water level showing the tidal variability. And then when it closes, the gray area with the increase in the water level, the red line going up, and then asymptoting a bit as you get a water balance with high water levels in these closed systems, where the inflow can be balanced by water losses. The other thing that happens dramatically is that the top is a change to stratification. And the top is a longitudinal salinity gradient from red near the mouth, high salinity, to blue near towards the land, 10 kilometers up, which is low salinity. And then when the mouth closes, that longitudinal gradient changes into a vertical gradient. The other thing happens is, can be seen in this time series of top panel temperature, middle one salinity, and the lower one oxygen. And particularly looking at the lower one here, the oxygen is fine, around 100%, varying a bit until the mouth closes, and then it drops to 0 over a period of about a week due to its natural biological oxygen demand. And this is expected and observed pretty much in most of these barbelled estuaries. The very strong stratification is remarkable, and I'd like to illustrate it with this data that Jill Slinger and I collected in '88 in Perched Estuary in South Africa, the top one being salinity, bottom one being temperature profiles over about a 2-month period. And you'll see that this bottom water salinity barely changes, and likewise the bottom temperature barely changes. So this bottom, the rate of vertical diffusivity is sort of molecular. It's basically turbulence is shut down. So we've looked at this in more detail in the Russian River. One site is Penny Island, the top 3 panels here, and the other is Paddy's Rock. Penny Island is near the mouth here, and Paddy's Rock is on the bend of the estuary. And you'll see that Paddy's Rock oxygen over a 24-hour period, the high oxygen, actually hyperoxic in the interface, and hypoxic down below the interface. And so using salinity data, we could deduce vertical diffusivities, and knowing that using an oxygen balance, we can show both at Paddy's Rock and Penny Island this red increase in oxygen during the day and decrease at nighttime due to photosynthesis and respiration in an interface or metalimnion where there's essentially no turbulence going on. So when the mouth closes is not only important in relation to the river and the forcing of waves in rivers and tides, but it's also important to the consequences. If it closes in the fall or the summer, shorter or longer days, more or less light, and also the surface warming. And this has turned out to be pretty important in the Russian River Estuary, where we're looking at habitat for steelhead trout. And this plot started with Dane Behrens, and Katie Dubois updated it, and Sam Winter worked on it as well. Over about a 40-year period here, you've got January to December 1973 to 2017, and the oranges are where the mouth is closed and the blues where it's open. And if you put those together on the right here, you have sort of by month, most commonly closed in October, November, December, which is late summer, fall, autumn, actually more like early winter, to be honest. And but not only that monthly climatology, but you also have this interannual variability with it being more closed in some years than others. Although since about the 90s, that's largely due to management. The red is where the mouth is opened artificially. But looking back here in 82, it's a very wet year, the mouth didn't close, and in 77, it's a very dry year, the mouth was closed much more than normal. So this work has continued through Sam Winter's master's, where he's looked at all these sites through California, from the wetter areas in the north, the Tidal River, to the dry areas in the south, the Tijuana, and identifying different seasonal closures. Some close in summer, some only close in the fall, some close in the spring, but if they close in the spring, they tend to stay closed. But variations on a theme, even in the same climate region. So now jumping to Pescadero Lagoon, which you can see on the right here, it's much more like a coastal plain with extensive marshes, not like the canyon of the Russian River. But in these channels, when the mouth closes, you see the same, of course, water level rising, but also the same stratification. The rise of water level is really important here because it inundates the marshes, and that has impacts not only on the marsh, which is super important, what will be addressed later on, but also because the marsh channel connection becomes very important. So just one example is data from May to December 2016, site BC3, so just going back, BC3 is up this channel on the corner there, and you'll see a few interesting things going on. This is the water level and the top and the temperature, at the top and the bottom temperature, top and bottom salinity, top and bottom oxygen. This intriguing pulsing of the salinity. And if you look up, you can see the pulsing of the tidal range, which basically lines up with the spring neap cycle, which Dane Behrens did show in Russian River, but is really marked here in these smaller systems, how the mouth changes and pulses with the tidal range. And with that, the stratification from mixed to stratifies, and with that, the oxygen. But then you also see here's the closed period, the water level becomes flat for a long time. Then there was an early rain in October, and the water level went up just enough to crest over those marshes. And if you look down at oxygen, you see that's when the oxygen crashed. And what's happening here is not just the bottom oxygen being low. So that's the Russian River model, which we see here in August, where the top and bottom salinity is separate, it's stratified, and the bottom oxygen goes to zero. But this here in October is because the marshes are getting inundated and are supplying a whole bunch of crud. It's probably the best term, oxygen demand, mostly reduced substances that strip oxygen really quickly into the channel, which reduces the oxygen. And it's the worst during breach events. And so this system we started working on, because whenever it was breached, you tend to have a fish kill. This water would be top to bottom anoxic or close to it for days, and the fish had nowhere to go. So Pescadero has been a really interesting study in the importance of marshes in these systems. And thirdly, as a contrast, Scott Creek Estuary is a really small perch system. If the mouth is fully eroded, there'll basically be no water in the system. And here we see shorter time scales and slight differences, or big differences due to that. Daniel Nyland at his master's here. And what we see here is if every closure, he made time zero the day it closed. And then this is a plot of 20 days. When it closes, the bottom salinity is high, this blue line, but over the time it gets lower. When it closes, there is no oxygen impairment really, but these green bars are the probability of oxygen being less than 6 milligrams per liter, which is critical for fish. And it gets worse, worse, worse for about a week, which is the same as a Russian and a few other places we've looked. Typical natural BOD will kind of do that. But then it starts getting better again, and it gets better because the salinity at the bottom is dropping. It's basically the bottom layer is being eroded out. And it's very much what we saw in the palmite, not in that deep section I showed earlier, but in the shallow section. The bottom layer gets eroded. The hypoxia doesn't last more than some days. So the key issues that are driving a lot of this research and that we need to address as scientists to help, guide management of these systems. The one is flooding. Here's the Russian River. When the early winter storm built the berm higher than normal, they couldn't open the mouth, so it flooded naturally and flooded the natural floodplain, which happens to be the town of Jena and across the coastal highway and the farms. These are natural systems where we developed the floodplain, just like many other river systems. And in Pescadero, it's kind of I like this picture of digital elevation with the creeks coming in and the marshes, and then the town's built in the floodplain. Yes, it's above the tidal marsh, but not much, and it's flat because there have been previous times when it flooded and flattened the place out. Secondly, a fish habitat, steelhead trout are one of the most common, but coho, chinook as well. And over here my slide's not advancing for some reason. There we go. So over here we have looked at water quality, temperature, salinity, and oxygen, and created these longitudinal sections in the Russian River, and showing black being unsuitable because of oxygen. Each of these categories is different depending on temperature, salinity, and oxygen. The green is the best. But we also can track it through time over here for about 2 months in 2013. And you can see the green, cool, low salinity layer growing through the closure, and the black layer sort of getting less, but not really going away, but it's small compared to the others. So talking about the different pressures on the habitat, driven by warming on the one hand, by ocean intrusion on the other hand, and by stratification, hypoxia on the third hand. And then the last issue then is marsh health and public health. So the link between the closure and the hydrology in the marsh. The marshes need to be inundated not to desiccate, and the marshes need to be inundated in order to accrete. So this is something we're working on, a sea level rise, is if you want marshes to keep pace, you need them to accrete fast enough. And the public health thing then is effective mosquito control. When mouths are closed in the big freshwater wetlands, they harbor mosquitoes. So some questions just here to think about the questions we need to answer about what controls a low point in the berm, what controls the closure timing, what controls how much water is trapped, what controls the vertical mixing. These are the science questions that we have to figure out.